Battery shows us 0 amps, 100 milliamps, and now it's on 0. 0 watts, 0 watts, battery is 100% charged at 57 volts. Nothing is going in anymore. The current going into the battery is going up and down slowly. And I think this current is dependent on the balancing situation of the BMS. Yeah, it comes back now. 6 watts, 11 watts, 170, 230, 300, 330, 350. Yeah, it's a very dynamic system now. And I think it uses this current here to compensate for the losses it has while balancing, because it is a passive balancer on this BMS. Guys, welcome back to the Off-Grid Garage here in not so sunny Australia today. A bit of cloud situation here in the sky. Of course, I'm doing battery testing and winter is back. It's only 24 degrees today, so it's a bit cool. We have 26 amps outside at the moment. But when we hit these gaps between the clouds, I can see over 10 kilowatt of power being generated already. Guys, we are back in the 5-digit charging numbers. Totally crazy how much power this generated already. In today's video, we want to have a look at a certain BMS, a good old friend, so to speak. I want to revisit the Seplos BMS version 2, the 10E BMS. This was the first one which came out with Bluetooth. And I wasn't quite a big fan of it. Weak passive balancer. BMS resets to 100% state of charge only if you hit an overvoltage protection, either cell or pack. And then it also turns off the charge MOSFETs and also shuts down your MPPT solar charge controllers. And in my BMS comparison chart, I gave this BMS 1 frog out of 5 only. Really bad, didn't like it, didn't like the features. The functions didn't work well for me. Well, some of you guys left comments under the videos and said, well, it's working just fine. It balances the pack, it keeps the charge MOSFET on, and also the MPPT solar charge controllers alive. And thanks to these viewers of this amazing community we have here, I am today revisiting this BMS here and are trying out their recommended settings. Yeah, and this BMS sits here in the Seplos Mason case. And it is connected to our battery 1.0. This was the very first 16S battery we have built here in the Off-Grid Garage, which was sitting in this plastic container, and it was great. We spent very long nights with this battery here in the Off-Grid Garage. I've got very mixed memories about this battery. So eventually, once we built the battery shelf, I didn't use this battery anymore, and I bought the Seplos Mason do-it-yourself kit case. If you haven't seen this, I'll link this down below. It's an amazing case with all the accessories. You put your own battery cells in it, and it is a fantastic battery. And the kit also comes with the Seplos BMS 10E. And today I want to share with all of you what these amazing people have found out, what settings they have tweaked to make this BMS actually work with a Victron system, for example, where I had so much trouble with current limiting, chargers turned off, over voltage protection needed. All this is apparently away, is gone with the right and correct settings. So all the credit again goes to these amazing people who have found out and contacted me, left comments under the video, shared their experience. Well, and I'm trying it out today and sharing it with you. So, and in the last couple of days I have fully charged now the battery from solar from our pool fence system. First to 55.2 volts and then finally to 57 volts, what we are on right now. You can see there's no current going in anymore apart from this little, I would call it balance compensation current, because the passive balancer of the BMS now is now burning energy of the high voltage cells. And because we have set the charge controllers to 57 volts now, they keep the voltage constant. So the battery basically doesn't discharge, even we are taking energy away through this balancing. But this gets replenished immediately through these 100 millivolts or 0 at the moment. So, and then after sunset, I put the power supply onto the battery and kept the voltage constant at 57 volts. I kept the battery on 57 volts the whole night, so the balancer had time to do some work. And I could see these 100 to 300 milliamps going into the battery as well on the power supply. And at 7 o'clock, I took a screenshot, which is this one here, and I had 166 millivolt deviation across the battery. And I said, that is quite a lot for a passive balancer. Even at 57 volts, it will be very hard for the balancer to do any work on this battery. But I did not hit an overvoltage protection situation, so that's how balanced the battery still was. And I said, well, do the test, keep it on 57 volts overnight and see what happens in the morning. And let me show you what is going on right now. So 166 at 7 p.m. We now have 12:30 p.m. So it's like 17 hours of balancing now at 57 volts. And I present you the result right now. Here is the current situation of our Seplos BMS and the battery, and we are down to 90 millivolt deviation now. If we compare this to the actual screenshot from last night. Oh no, there it was cell number 6. Okay, it doesn't matter. So, highest voltage from 3.598 to 3.585. So it has come down just a tiny bit, but the lowest cell was always cell number 2. See, number 2, number 2. And this one came actually up from 3.432 to 3.494. So it's almost at 3.5 volts. So this tiny 100 to 300 milliamp current going into the battery has actually recharged this battery cell here, that the voltage climbed by 50 millivolt. Yeah, we are talking about 50 millivolt here. And the deviation has come down by 76 millivolt. But you can see it is working. It is top balancing the battery now, even with the passive balancer on the Seplos BMS 10E, the version 2 of this BMS. So obviously, as these people said, charging to a higher voltage makes the passive balancer actually work. But depending on the consistency of your cells, it may actually take a long time for a passive balancer, even at 57 or 58 volts. We're talking about 50, 60, 80 milliamps, maybe 100 milliamps balance current with these BMSs. So it takes a long time. But at the time when we built this battery, I didn't fully top balance the cells before we put the battery together because I wanted to see how good the internal balancer of the Seplos BMS actually is. Well, and some of you gave me a hard time for that, because this is not the way you're doing it usually when you build a battery. Especially not with a passive balancer, because they are so weak. They need a good top balancing to start with, and then they are okay if you charge to these higher voltages. And this is exactly the point as well. I never charged to 57 volts with my battery shelf at all, never ever. 55.2, this is my absorption voltage. And it worked with the JK BMS and the active balancer, as well with the overkill solar BMS and the passive balancer. Just the Heltec BMS is a bit different, I would say. I think it has some hardware or software issues, or even both maybe or so, because it makes this weird imbalance between cell 1 and 10 now. The charging-discharging current is 15% off, and it has some other software bugs. The BMS works for protection purposes, but the software still needs a lot of work and probably a full redesign. Anyway, back to the Seplos BMS here. You can see how the balancer has worked in the 17 hours, from 166 millivolt down to 89 millivolt now. So we are slowly making progress. But I think over time it may actually work. I'm not sure what the cell drift will be once we start using this battery in a daily charge and discharge situation. Small and large currents, not fully charging every single day. But we can test this out in a future video. And then you also may have seen that I don't have any warnings, despite the fact that most of the cells are over 3.5 volts now. We've got 57 volt pack voltage and no warning, nothing, 0. And all these alarms or protections, they usually have one thing in common. They reduce the charging current into the battery. This is a very unique feature with the Seplos BMSs, which people like, people don't like. I don't like it. I'll talk about it in a second. But as soon as you hit an alarm over current, over temperature, over voltage, high voltage alarm, just an alarm, and any of these alarms, they are causing the BMS to tell the charger to slow down to 10 amps. Even the charger could deliver far more. This is good for the battery because it slows down your charging process and it gives the balancer and the BMS more time to sort things out. But here in my off-grid situation, it is really bad because it limits your charge controller to 10 amps only. And if you have a larger load connected, it actually takes the energy from your battery instead of the solar charge controller, even you have pure sunshine outside. But you can also turn this feature on and off. And as you can see, My one is turned off. I don't have any warnings, any protections, any alarms, nothing. So, and we want to dive straight into it now. As you can see, the battery sits on 57 volts and obviously doesn't charge anymore. But both discharge and charge MOSFETs are turned on in the BMS. You can also see here in the background the parameters of the BMS in the Victron remote console. And the charge voltage limit, the CVL, sits on 57.6 volts. So why is the battery not charging higher than 57 volts if the charge controller is being told charge the battery to 57.6? Well, let's have a look in the parameters. What is actually responsible for the charge voltage limits CVL? It is parameter number 14, which is the total voltage over voltage protection. This sits on 57.6. If I change this in here, to 57.8, for example, and write the parameters back, you can see it changes up here in the Victron VRM. So it tells the solar charge controller, charge now to 57.8. So this is a one-to-one setting and parameter. You would charge your battery to 57.8 volts, and then the over voltage protection would kick in, which I never liked with the Seplos BMSs, because this turns off your charge MOSFETs. It sets your charge current limit to 0 amps because you are in a protection state with your BMS. And this was, as per Seplos information, the only way to reset your BMS to 100%. So either hitting the total voltage over voltage protection, number 14, or hitting number 4, single over voltage protection, which is on 3.65 volts. So either cell or pack over voltage protection resets to 100%. This was the information in written I have gotten from Seplos. I have tested it, yeah, it worked, and I couldn't find any other way to reset to 100% until now. And for that, we will have a look at the BMS comparison chart. So these two are the first generation BMS with different firmwares, second generation BMS, what we are looking at right now, and the third version BMS. And with the third version BMS, they actually introduced another method to recalibrate to 100%. If the battery voltage is higher than your cell high voltage alarm times 16, and this for 30 minutes. Is exactly what it says here. So if you set your alarm to 3.5 volts, times 16 is 56 volts, and your battery voltage goes over these 56 volts, for 30 minutes, it resets to 100%. And we've confirmed this in the Polo batteries already, so this is all working. And it's actually a pretty good method to reset to 100%, because it gives the battery half an hour of absorption time, of balance time at a higher voltage. And then it says, okay, I'm at 100% now. A different engineer at Seplos BMS told me that this method of resetting to 100% also applies to the version 2 BMS. He said, yeah, version 2 and version 3 have the same trigger mechanisms to reset to 100%. All of this information came from Seplos, but different engineers. I have to test and verify that, right? Holy shit. Quick interruption. We've got 150 amps outside now. Wow. Sun just came back between the clouds. Somewhere a gap. Yeah. Oh yeah, there's a bit of sun now coming into the next. Can't do anything about it. And some of you guys found out already that the BMS actually resets to 100% without going into OVP. But you couldn't quite tell me why that is and what triggers this 100%. So I went back to Seplos and asked this question. I said, well, the version 3 has now these options. What about the version 2? And they confirmed these are exactly the same conditions for the BMS version 2 to the BMS version 3. So let's see and find out and test this here in the video if it actually works. So to make this work, you go into your Victron remote console. Get out of your BMS, go into settings, go into your DVCC and set a maximum charge voltage here of 57 volts. This is basically now regulating the charge voltage into your system. These are exactly the 57 volts we are seeing here. So we set this to a 57.8, but we limit our charge voltage to 57 only in the DVCC of the Victron system. If you haven't got a Victron system, I would have no idea how to set this up in your case. I have heard from other people using the Seplos BMS with different inverters and stuff, and it seems to work somehow as well, but I have no idea. I could not tell you what the actual settings are for your specific inverter. This is how it works with the Seplos BMS and the Victron system, but any other inverter or system you have connected with the Seplos BMS, please, guys, leave the comments down below. What are your settings to make this work? To reset to 100%, to charge to a lower voltage without using the over voltage protection parameters. So some of you have figured this out, so please keep sharing these information for everyone else, and we are trying to make Seplos great again. So, and here in the settings you can also see that I have set a single high voltage alarm to 3.5 volts. And all the cells which are over 3.5 volts are having this amber color, this orange brownish color here. So they are in an alarm state, kind of, but there's no alarm popping up down here in the status field of the BMS. And what I have done is I went into the function switches here on the right, and I have turned off single high voltage alarm. Yeah. When I turn this one on, we will get an alarm and the charge current goes to 10 amps. Look at this. So I turn this feature on, go to set all. We will get an alarm straight away, single high voltage alarm, and you can see how the charge current limit goes down to 10 amps now. And this would limit my charge controller here to 10 amps output, regardless if into the battery or to load. Any loads connected to the system which need more power take the energy from the battery, so you're constantly discharging, charging, cycling your battery at this voltage then, which I don't like. And we've got plenty of sunshine outside now, so the charge controllers can deliver like 10 kilowatts or something, but I'm discharging my battery. This was always a big negative point in the Seplos BMSs. And I would like to thank Helmut from Pfaffenhofen in Germany for testing this feature out with his system at home as well. And he actually confirmed that this 10 amp limit is not applying to his system because he is grid connected. Whenever the battery gets full and limits the charging current, the MPPTs are still producing as much power as they can and export all the energy to the grid. So obviously this function is different if you are off-grid or if you are grid connected. So keep this in mind. Whatever I test here, it's all off-grid, but that's why it is so important to share this information under the videos for everyone else. Thanks, Helmut. Good work. And if I turn off the single high voltage alarm again, write this back to the BMS, the warning disappears and my charge current limit goes up again to 50 amps as it was before. Disabling this high voltage alarm also disables the current limiter when the battery gets full. Usually at 3.5 volts this alarm comes on and then limits your charging current into the battery to 10 amps as well. Which some people like, because they say it slows down the charging process, gives the BMS time, the balancer time, which doesn't make a difference at all. But I think if we are on a constant voltage charging already at 57 volts, the current will taper off very quickly anyway, just naturally. Because the cells are absorbed, they can't take any more energy, so they're taking less energy at 57 volts. As long as we keep the voltage constant, the current will go down in your batteries anyway. So I don't see a big advantage actually of having a current limiter when the battery is almost fully charged. But for pure safety purposes, I have still set the total voltage over voltage protection to 57.8. If something goes wrong with my Raspberry Pi or something and it doesn't limit my charge current to 57 volts anymore, I still have the 57.8 volts, and when we hit that, we will get a over voltage protection and the charge current goes to 0. So it tells all the chargers, stop charging altogether, something is not right. But what I did is I set parameter number 10, it is the total voltage high voltage alarm, to 57.5. If we would reach this voltage here, PEC voltage, we would trigger a PEC alarm, a PEC high voltage alarm, and this would then also slow down our charge current to 10 amps. So this is another safety step and another safety mechanism I left in the BMS running. So your parameter number 10 corresponds to this function switch. I can turn this off as well, but I left this on purpose because if something goes wrong and we charge to 57.5 volts, we would trigger this alarm and it would limit our charge current to 10 amps. But this is only if something goes wrong, if something is not right for whatever reason. Another step before we hit parameter number 14 and turn off altogether, charge current goes to 0 at 57.8 volts. So I've got my charge limit, I've got my high voltage alarm, and I've got my high voltage protection. 3-layer protection basically. And changing the BMS to these settings here actually gets rid of most of the complaints I had with this BMS before. We can charge to a voltage which is not the protection voltage. We keep the charge and discharge MOSFETs turned on. We've got no limits for my MPPTs, even the battery is fully charged. And we now have a 3-step protection system in the BMS, which is great. So the only thing we need to test now is the BMS actually resetting to 100% after half an hour? So again, our battery voltage needs to be higher than our cell high voltage alarm, which is the 3.5 volts in our setting, times 16. So the battery voltage needs to be higher than 56 volts for half an hour. And let's see if the BMS resets to 100%. So first thing we need to do is we need to discharge this battery a bit because, just by the way, cell number 2 is now over 3.5 volts. So it has increased the voltage from, where's the screenshot again, from 3.432 to over 3.5 volts now. So that is actually good progress, but it took like 18, 19 hours now to do that. An active balancer would have done this in a few minutes. But nevertheless, Andy, stay positive. It is working. Okay, so the easiest way to discharge this battery is just to turn on one of the other batteries. We can use the Jackie 100 ampere hour. I think this is around half full or so. So this should take a good chunk of energy now. Oh yeah, 60 amps. Here we go. 50, 52. Nice. This is a good, nice discharge. So let's leave this running for a couple of minutes and then we turn it off again and recharge the battery to 100% again. I will also fake the rated capacity here. Let's fake this one to 290 ampere hours because this will now fake the state of charge. Yeah, we are now down to 96.4% already. So once we recharge the battery, we will see if this one resets to 100%. Okay, I'll turn off the load again. And we are now recharging from solar, and you have seen all these parameters up here for the Victron solar charge controllers have not changed. Regardless if I'm fully charged or if I'm discharging or recharging now, it always gives the same limits, so that is great. Okay, so 280 watts are coming from solar at the moment. It's a big cloud again. So the first cells are now balancing. I have left the balancer turn on voltage at 3.45 because the cell is out of the flat area of the curve. And if one of the cells is hitting this voltage first, it is clearly a high voltage cell and we can start pushing it down with the balancer. Actually, I have just turned off the solar panels here. I want to wait until the sun is coming back because we want to fully charge this battery here hard. Yeah, we want to go in with maximum 1.6 kilowatt or whatever they can deliver into this battery here and see what happens if we have a runner, how much the deviation is, and how this all works without changing the charge current limit. So I'll be back once the sun is coming out. Could be a few minutes. There's a fairly big field now without clouds, so hopefully this is enough to recharge the battery. We want to recharge hard. We want to go in hard now to fully charge this battery. Maximum power, 25 amps. So yeah, there are 25 amps from solar coming. And we want to see what's going on. I hope the screen recorder is running. It is running. Okay, so we are at 54.5 volts already. There you go, 27 amps. Nice. Going quickly to 55. And we should see the first cells at 3.45. This is where the balancer starts kicking in. 55.2, this is our old absorption voltage. But now we are charging further to 57 volts. So also watch the state of charge situation here. And I will note the time when we actually hit the 56 volts, because this is then the trigger for this half an hour threshold, if there is one. And we can see the first cells popping up now as an alarm over 3.5 volts. 56 volts, there it is, 149. 149. So this is when the half an hour starts counting. You can see, despite all the alarms and everything here, we are not changing any limits in the Victron system anymore. We are keep charging as much as we can. And now we have overshoot the 57 volts. This can actually happen when you charge that fast. So your throttle's down, voltage comes down, everything is good. We are at 100 millivolt deviation now. That's why you have to set your pack over voltage alarm correctly, not to trigger it if you are overshooting your maximum charge voltage. So this has come down now to 57 volts. We are at 93 millivolt deviation, and the current has naturally tapered off to under 1 amp. Let's wait for this half an hour now and see if the BMS actually resets to 100%. If it does it before that, I'll take a note and be back as soon as it happens. Okay, see you in half an hour. Okay, it is now 19 past 2. It has just reset. I have not caught it on video. Really? I was just turning on the recorder. I'm not sure if it's on there. I don't think I have captured the situation. Let me quickly check. Now, I was too late, 1 or 2 seconds too late. I just looked on the state of charge and was still on 96.5%. And it was 18 past 2. So I said, okay, 1 minute, then we have exactly half an hour. And when I clicked the button, it was already 100%. So it is actually as it says here in my spreadsheet. All right, so this is now the trigger for setting the BMS back to 100%. Battery voltage over cell high voltage alarm times 16 for 30 minutes. And then it resets to 100%. So if you're one of these persons who are wondering why the BMS resets to 100%, that is why. So you just need to get all the settings correctly set up now. I have already put some comments underneath here and explain how this all works, and also talk about the optional current limiting function, which you can turn off and turn on with the BMS now. Okay, then the only thing we need to do is here give this BMS more than one frog now. I would give it, is there anything which is not working now anymore? Well, the limitation here is now that it only works like this with a Victron system. Because now we can go into the DVCC and set a maximum charge voltage limit, which is independent from the over voltage protection the BMS tells your charger to charge to. So in this case, I would leave it in three frogs from 1 to 3. But as I said before, please leave your comments down below. Share your information, share your knowledge, your experience. If you have the Seplos BMS running with a non-Victron system, a non-Victron inverter, how are your settings? How do you go to 100% state of charge in your BMS without hitting an overvoltage protection? All right, I'll update all the other columns here as well. That is very, very good. I'm very, very happy with it. I'm relieved, actually. So in here, as you can see again, none of the parameters in your My Charge controllers have changed. There's no limit. If I would turn on a load now, it would be 100% being powered from the solar if possible, and the battery would not be touched at all. I think once this battery is fully top balanced, the internal passive balancer can actually maintain the battery, depending. We will test this in a future video once we have done the additional extension of our battery shelf. Alright my friends, so far this video from today, revisiting the Seplos BMS. So full thumbs up now for this BMS with the correct settings here coming from you guys. This is all about you, the community, the people behind it, the people who are sharing, who are commenting, leaving their experience in the comment fields. Sometimes really long comments. But if you have issues with anything, read these comments. They are so wonderful and valuable tips and information in there. It's unbelievable. This whole video has been made possible by you guys. Because you have told me, Andy, you have to revisit the Seplos BMS. They are working with these and these and these settings. So please keep sharing. This is what this channel is about. And also thank you very much to everyone who has donated to the channel now, keeping the show going here, so I can actually pay the power bills here, because sometimes I have to leave the computer running overnight. Costs a lot of power. Well, occasionally I take this money as well and buy a beer. So thank you again for your donations, and welcome to the SPAT team. Until the next video, guys, when we do something very, very different. You stay charged, stay safe, and thanks again for watching. See you then. Bye-bye.